Hi, you're listening to Photofocus. I'm your host, Rich Harrington, and joining me this week is co-host Scott Bourne. How you doing, Scott?
I'm really good, Rich. All fired up to talk about a whole bunch of photographic-related topics.
Yeah, we've got a good potpourri today, and the one I wanted to start with, I'm actually looking forward to getting back to it, is black and white photography. And I think the reason why I'm excited for this is I have a couple of trips coming up that are going to take me out to nature. I've got a week in the mountains coming up, and then I'm going to be going down to Panama later on, and I don't know. I always like black and white photography with landscapes. I sometimes find that it just brings out the details for me. You've been shooting black and white for years. I think it's one of those things that a lot of people just don't have an appreciation for. Why don't we start with just some of your initial thoughts about when to go black and white?
Well, certain subjects look better in black and white than others, but back in the day, that was all we had. When I started, we had Tri-X film. It was black and white, and that's what you shot. And nobody really shot any color film when I first started. Color film was available, but nobody was using it. Black and white was the standard, and it does offer more latitude. So generally, you can work in a higher contrast situation with black and white film than you can with color film. That's if you're shooting film. However, that rule goes away if you're shooting digital. You don't have more contrast, available to you, because if you're shooting raw, you just got what you got. So the whole black and white thing has changed, of course, with the advent of plugins, and there's tremendous ones out there. Nick makes a really good one called Silver Effects Pro, which I use a lot, but almost every application has a good black and white plugin.
Well, and let's start there, actually. One of the things I think that's a very common misperception about black and white photography is it isn't simply stripping away the color. So, when you go to post-processing, it's not just go into Camera Raw and drag the saturation slider over. I think a lot of people, much like a good HDR, sort of skip a couple of steps. And so I tend to really develop and start to do a curves adjustment and really play with the colors. In fact, I'll often pop them so we have tremendous amount of vibrance and color to work with. And then I start to look at the individual components of color. There's a couple of ways of doing this. You mentioned the Nick plugin. I really like that. I use Silver Effects a lot. There's also a really cool plugin called Zones from the Digital Film Tools folks, and it's kind of also rolled into some of the Tiffin packages where you view the color sort of using the zone system, and you can start to work and build the grayscale image that way as well. So, any technical tips you can add both for the shooting side and as you move into the post-processing?
Well, if you know in advance, Rich, that you're going to want to make an image black and white, it sure does help, because then you can think about those things. The zone system you're referring to is made popular by Ansel Adams, and in the zone system, you decide where you want the blackest black and the whitest white and the middle gray to be, and that could be 2 or 3 stops high or low from where it should be. And then he achieved it with tricks in the darkroom. We achieve it with tricks in the digital darkroom. But if you know you're going to shoot a black and white to begin with, that helps, because then you can make some decisions about which highlights you want to hold and which ones you don't care about. What spectrum of data is most important to you. That's one real advantage. The other thing is to know that you're not going to have the advantage of hue and color to help draw the attention of the viewer. So technically, my first tip is make sure that you have the brightest part of the screen be your subject, because a lot of time we can rely on color to move the eye around the photograph. But if there's no color, the eye automatically, even sometimes when there is color, the eye automatically goes to the brightest thing on the screen. And if you're taking a picture of grandma and the sun is on the other side of the frame, people are going to look at the sun and not grandma. So just remember to keep the brightest thing in the frame closest to your subject.
Yeah, and another thing that I like to do when shooting outdoors, doing landscape HDR types, or even still lifes, is do them with a high dynamic range image. I really like taking advantage of that extra information you can capture, and I think even a lot of people who dislike stylized HDR will find that using HDR as a technical tool just to capture a broader range really works nicely. And you can do that with Photoshop or other tools. Nick has a very nice HDR tool. The built-in Photoshop tool is quite solid. I'm just finding this to be really fun. I think it's, especially as I go back to some of the same places, some of the travel I have coming up is family trips, and some of these are places that I've gone a lot to. I think forcing myself to shoot in black and white, think in black and white, and to clarify, I'm not actually putting the camera in black and white mode, but just shooting with black and white in mind forces me to sort of think about composition a bit more and exposure a bit more. I don't know, I think it's a good exercise to sort of strengthen some of those core areas, because when we're dealing with color, it's too easy to over-rely on color or over-rely on tricks in post-processing to make the image pop. And I think that black and white photography in some ways can be a little bit more elegant or force you to be a bit more traditional in composition and exposure.
Well, definitely it brings the graphical elements to bear more importantly, so that's something to note. And I think it is important to mention a few technical things, Rich. Don't convert in your camera, because then you lose the opportunity to make it a color image if you ever need it. So shoot it. We prefer both. I think you and I agree, prefer to shoot as much as possible in RGB and in RAW, and then convert in post. And don't use the convert to grayscale command ever in Photoshop. In fact, you have a lot of pull with Adobe, and we're both on the influencer program. Can we just ask that be removed?
Well, there is a reason to go to a grayscale image technically, but there's a giant warning that comes up. And what it says is you can get much better grayscale conversion by first using a black and white adjustment layer. And so what you want to do is use that black and white adjustment layer. There's a great little on image tool that sort of looks like a pointed finger. And when you click on that, it automatically, intelligently grabs the right slider. And then you've got sliders for basically RGB and cyan, magenta, yellow. And as you drag, you give different emphasis of how dark or light those areas get. So it's really nice that, for example, you could have a photo, like say of a parrot, and you've got green, reds, and yellows. Well, if you just strip the color out, if they're all similar saturations, when you lose the hue, it just looks like a monochromatic bird. But the ability to push the colors independently, some darker or lighter, makes a better black and white. So if you do that first, and then you invoke the grayscale image mode because of a technical reason, for example, you're delivering to a newspaper, and I used to do a lot of newspaper work, there are still delivery formats where you have to deliver a grayscale image. And the grayscale also serves as a stepping point for creating duotones or tritones for technical printing.
We won't get them to remove that part anyway. I know. Was mentioning it.
Well, no, it was good to mention, and it's good to know why it's there. But you brought up a great point, which is don't just go image mode grayscale. Done. It's a little more than that. You want to take advantage of some of the other options that are in there.
There are a ton of plugins. Seriously, look at all the plugins that will help you, because you can find some stuff. But now here's something shocking, Rich. Back in the day, we actually had to screw a filter on while we made the shot if we wanted to change that emphasis.
Yes, so. I remember. And you actually still have those in Photoshop. There's a whole photo filter category with reds and blue filters that try to simulate that. I remember that. That brings up a good point. Glass filters. Why don't we switch gears for a second? Okay. I have a few glass filters in my bag. I find myself pulling out my ND filter plenty. I find myself using a gradiated filter when shooting video, and sometimes a polarizer, but that's about it. Is there any other filters I should be looking at adding to my bag, or is it all post these days?
It's all post, Rich. I mean, the only filters I carry are circular polarizers and very NDs or multi-step NDs. NDs are now all the rage. People are starting to experiment with them. Mostly they became popular because people like you who shoot video for a living have needed to control exposure on these new HDSLRs with a neutral density filter, because they wasn't built into the camera like it is on some of the video cameras. So you would slap one of these things on, but it does amazing things. It makes it day into night, so you can shoot 2-minute exposures at noon, and they look really cool. So a variable ND filter is expensive if it's a good quality one. I use the one from Stingray, and it cost a fortune, but it's really good. And then a circular polarizer, and that's it. That's the only filters that you need. They should both be good quality. They should be glass, not plastic, in my opinion. And you should spend as much as you can possibly afford, because I never understand people that spend $2,500 on a $7,200 or $7,200 lens, and then they buy a $2 plastic filter to put over the front of it. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
It's the weakest link. Yeah, that could.
It is.
Yeah, Well, it actually brings up one good point. One of the things that I do like to use my ND filters for is to avoid getting lens flares. I often find between that and the hood, which many people, I'm amazed, especially when I'm traveling, I'm on vacation, the number of people who have their hoods on the lens backwards, because that's how they ship. Do you chuckle when you see that? Do you feel sorry for them?
I get yelled at for telling strangers they should put their hood on. I can't help myself. It's like, do you think that that's there for a reason? And people are like, oh, you don't really need it. And they'll quote somebody who they respect, who somewhere said you don't really need a lens hood, but the fact is you do. It reduces not only flare, but more importantly, refraction.
Right.
Light refraction is this evil little thing that reduces contrast, and sometimes you don't even know it's happening, and you're like, that image is a little flat. If you had reduced the flare via the refraction that was coming into the lens, it wouldn't have been so flat. So it may not show up as a starburst, as you know, like we think of as flare.
Just a lack of contrast.
But there's a lack of contrast. In fact, just so you know, this is one of the old things that the old guys taught me back from like the 30s and 40s guys.
So that they're dead now.
They're dead now. Jack Russell taught me this, and he's dead now. He's an old photojournalist. He's like, when you say a lens is sharp, what you're really saying is it's contrasty. That's what he used to tell me. So in any event, use your lens hood. And now here's another place I get yelled at. All the photography camera-related stores in the world hate me because I tell people, don't put one of those stupid skylight filters on your lens and think you're protecting it. Because I have offered rewards for people to be able to prove that somehow saved their lens. And if you have the lens hood on, some object has to be smaller than the lens hood to penetrate, to get in and destroy your front lens element, which is, by the way, the cheapest thing to fix on a lens anyway.
Well, I made the mistake of packing one of my lenses once into carry-on bag, or not carry-on bags, but a checked piece of baggage. And I can't say that it saved it, but when I got it, it was the screw-on filter that was smashed and not the glass behind it. So
had the lens hood on, it would have been the lens hood that was smashed.
Yeah, well, the lens hood was pointing back the other way to get it packed. It was packed in a padded bag, and it still got.
That's my secret. I pack them out.
Okay, so then you've got a good 2-inch or 1-inch cushion between the front of the lens and everything that happens.
Exactly. I don't care how much room it takes up in the bag. I always put my lens hoods on in the bag. They're always on the camera. That way, they offer the most protection. And I've been doing this 37 years. I've never had anything hit the front of a lens with or without a hood on there. And I will get email from some guy like Newfoundland who swears that a bird spit a pebble at it and it hit his front lens and it shattered. But so far, nobody's been ever able to prove it to me. And that if that one person does prove it to me, that doesn't just justify the cost of 200 million skylight filters sold to newbies as pure profit from the camera store for no reason.
Well, if a bird were to throw a pebble at your lens and smash it, or you just wanted to try out a new lens, do you have a suggestion for folks?
You want to go to borrowlenses.com, of course. Borrow Lenses has, okay, are you ready? Every single SLR lens sold, with the exception of the kit lenses that come with all the standard cameras. They have every other lens. They even have lenses for like the Red camera. They have lenses that you've never heard of, and they have all the really good lenses. So check them out at borrowlenses.com. We have a banner on the Photofocus homepage that you can click to get there, or you can just go to borrowlenses.com. And once you've borrowed that lens and made great photographs, you're going to want to show it off to everybody, Rich, and you'll probably want to do that over at SmugMug. They're at smugmug.com, and we also have a banner on the homepage to SmugMug Pro. That's the best way I know to do professional photo sharing. Now, we're not talking about amateur photo sharing, but in particular, if you want to sell your pictures, they do host amateur sites, but I'm talking to people that want to sell their stuff, that want to, make prints, that want to have things go off into frames. SmugMug's the place to do it.
Great. Now let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about location scouting. This is an idea that we've briefly touched on before, but I want to share some practical advice. And I think a lot of people underestimate the value of planning. Now, I'm a planning geek. In fact, like when I went back to school, I actually got a graduate degree in planning of all things. It's a project management degree, but it works. And I think I'm not necessarily a fair judge in that I overplan, but I like, if I'm going to go out on a shoot, to try to get there and scout the location ahead of time. Not the same day even, but try to go the day before, especially if it's a professional shoot. Or if I'm going to be at a place for a little bit, like on a trip, I might casually go by, take a look one night, and then go back again. I sometimes find that by revisiting a place or making sure I've seen it more than once, I have a good idea of what I can accomplish and what type of gear I should be bringing. What are some common things you see people screw up, or what are they giving up by not doing the site scout?
Well, Rich, you bring up something that's a lost art. And I think it's more present for you because, again, in video, it's just more standard. Very few video producers I know, people that shoot motion pictures or shoot video, would ever even think of going on to a location to work that they hadn't visited first.
Well, that's because you've got 10 to 20 people with you who you're paying by the hour, so it becomes just a matter of self-preservation. But photographers don't really have that burden. It's like, oh, it's just me. I'm just wasting my time.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because, like, I'll give you an example. Ansel Adams used to walk around with a Ratten number 90 filter and put it up to his eye, and then he'd carry a little logbook and he'd make notes, and he'd visit the same place over and over and over and over and over and over and over on different days of the week, different times of the day, different weeks of the month, different months of the year, so that he could study the light. He would draw little angles to show the sun and where it was in relationship to the objects. And then he would go photograph them. And of course, his photographs came out pretty darn good. So I think it's very important to know what you're up against. I think it's important. And the way that you prove this to yourself, Rich, is you look just around your house. Like, for instance, out a certain window by your kitchen, by looking at the light what time of day it is. You're used to seeing that. I have a condo at City Center. In the early morning, there's this odd-shaped building there that when the sun first hits it, it just lights up and looks really cool. And for the rest of the day, it looks flat and ugly. So that's the advantage of going to a place in advance. You know what looks cool when, and you can be there. And Rich, you know a lot about some of these apps that are available for smartphones that help you do location scouting. I think you've used a couple of those, haven't you?
Yeah, there's a couple. I use one called Light Track, which has sort of a mapping software built in, and you can enter in the location. It loads in Google Maps, and then you could say the date that you're going to be there, and it basically shows you a sun sweep of where the sun is going to be at what time, and that's kind of helpful. And then so you can sort of virtually scout a location. So I could see what's going to be around there. I can look at the satellite type view. In most cases, that'll give you imagery, unless, of course, it's like a military base, and then it's just a black hole. And then I'll use Sunseeker, which has a 3D view, and I use that a lot of times when I want to get an idea of where the sun's going to travel. So it literally uses the camera in your phone, and it shows you the path. And so it's like an enhanced reality view. So you see a live video feed through your camera's image, and then it updates and it shows you sort of a line of where the sun and the moon are going to be with a little snapshot at each time. So if you're trying to plan for things like sunrise or sunset, or you really want to get an idea of, I looked at the weather, the weatherchannel.com, and it says sunsets at 8 o'clock, but, I'm out here in this mountain range and it looks by about 7:20 that it's going to go behind that range there and I'm going to lose it. I could start to judge how much time I have in a location to shoot. So I find those really helpful. Do you have any others that you've used that you like?
Well, I use like the Google Street View maps all the time because then you can, if it's a place that they've been and mapped, you can see what it looks like.
Yeah, no, that goes a long way. And
another thing that I use a lot if it's in a residential area, and it's these various companies that help you sell your home. I'm not going to advertise any of them, but they often have maps of neighborhoods that you can zoom all the way down and like see somebody's driveway. So there's various different mapping sites and software available that I've used to get street views or visual cues about an area that I'm going to visit. And the other thing is just go on Flickr and search, like if you're going to Panama and you're going to photograph the Panama Canal, if you go to Flickr and search Panama Canal, you'll see like a billion photos of the Panama Canal. And you can, some of the people even share things like location information, or they geotag, and you could say, oh, well, that looks like a good angle to shoot. And then you'll have something available to you an asset that you wouldn't have known about.
Yeah, no, geotagging is great for that. And definitely, I think with the larger photography community, it pays to look around and see those who are willing to share what sort of shots they've gotten and recommended locations. Some people will pin those on a Google map, or you have the ability to sync data. So if you have your iPhone or your Droid phone with you and you fire off a few pics on that, you can copy and paste that GPS location in Lightroom and paste it onto the images, so that if you don't have a GPS sensor on your camera, although more and more of them have it these days, you can tag your photos with GPS data, which is nice. It gives back to the community. So if you are sharing those photos, people can find that location. I think that goes really well. The other thing I'd just say about scouting, and this is something that we do a lot in the video industry, is if you can't travel in advance, whether it be leveraging social media for free or hiring somebody as a location scout, there's a certain benefit of just sometimes saying, I'm going here. What should I know? And you can either hire somebody to go and look for you if it's a professional shoot and shoot a few images, or just leverage and look for people in that particular area. I actually find myself using some of the location aware stuff on Twitter, and will just sometimes do searches or post to find things near me. And that often will pop up or show me things. Like I'll view photos that were posted near me based on my location with Twitter, and just sometimes look to see if people are finding good images or what's popping up. Another one that works well for that is Foursquare. A lot of times if you're dealing with an urban environment, many people are checking into places and they're posting photos. So it's a great way to just browse a location and see some places you might have missed. There's all sorts of great little details hidden in a lot of architectural things, and sometimes we blow past the little details, and those are great ways of using social media just to sort of see what people are out there sharing.
I'll tell you this, Rich. Location scouting is a dying art, and I think it's a business opportunity for entrepreneurs out there. If you can hear my voice and you know your hometown really well, I suggest that you build a location scout blog, because before I moved to Vegas, I tried to hire location scouts to do some shoots here. And you know where I ended up hiring them from? Los Angeles.
And they flew it, yeah.
They knew Vegas better than anybody here that would respond to me. And even since I moved here, I have a couple of times posted on Twitter, I am trying to hire a location scout for this car shoot or this shoot. Is there anybody available? And it's crickets. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is a business. So if you know your area better than anybody, like I love hiring scouts, and I hire them all the time, particularly if I'm overseas. I used to do it. But a perfect example is if you go to the Navajo Nation, you have no choice. In order to, for instance, go to Monument Valley and take the really good pictures, like the picture of Monument Valley through the teardrop. And that's all on Indian land, and you have to hire an Indian guide, and the Indian guide takes you to the place and says, stand here, there's your shot, blah, blah, blah. And he knows where all the cool stuff is. You would spend decades traipsing around that desert to find that stuff. You pay this guy $50 and he takes you right there. It is worth every penny. And he does, like, every hour he takes a group of people to the teardrop for $50. He's making $50 an hour. I mean, there's money to be made as a location scout. I'm just sorry to be off on that little bit, but I think we need more location scouts. And this is my plea.
That also brings up a good thing. When I'm traveling, there's many times that I will sign up for the small tour groups. Now, usually you want to ask, are there any photographer friendly ones? Because one of the things I've noticed when being with different tour groups, like I went on two when I was over at Israel, is that they want to move at a much faster pace than I do. I'm like, wait, I need a picture. There's a zoom. They're on to the next thing. Read, zoom. So we actually hired one when we were walking around Jerusalem, and we just said, okay, we've got 5 people here. 4 of us are photographers and the other one's just sympathetic. We're going to be really slow, so take us to the most photogenic places and give us some time in each one. And it was great. Went to places and angles and views, and this is a great place to stand. You could really get a nice vista view here. Oh, this is one of the better places. This isn't that crowded. It was wonderful. And, not that I couldn't have stumbled that on my own, but I think a lot of times photographers overly embrace the I'm a lone wolf in the wilderness mentality too much. Just suck it up and just hire a tour guide and say, show me some pretty stuff. And
they're not that expensive. And another thing is, I know it's very kitschy and very touristy, but I love to take those bus tours that they sell you of every major city. When I first moved to Seattle, I took that touristy bus tour where they stop at all the places, and I instantly knew all the good photo locations because I'm making notes to myself. I mean, they weren't stopping and letting me take pictures, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to come back here. I looked at that. Then they put me on a boat, which gave me a shot of the harbor. So I went back later and contacted the boat captain, hired the boat, went back out to that spot, and shot from there. So yeah, all that stuff is really valuable. Go ahead and do it. You'd be surprised what you can learn, and that's the advantage to going to a place in advance, Rich. We'll just tie up this topic by starting where we began. If you've been there more than once, you'll know what it's going to look like, and you'll know what to be prepared. And if you can go over and over and over again, a great project is to photograph, let's say, a bridge or something like a stream at all four seasons. And so you go back and over and over again. Now, I used to do that at a place where we had a family cabin in Packwood, Washington. Unfortunately, the bridge got washed away by an earthquake, so I can't do that anymore.
Now, if let's talk a little bit about contests, Scott. If people have some great images and they want to submit or they want to run a contest, do you have a recommendation for them?
I really do. It's called viewbug.com. And let me tell you, it's even more important that you brought that up because not only can you go to viewbug.com and put your pictures up in enter to win prizes, etc., but we, Photofocus, you and me, Rich, and Adorama and Olympus and Animoto and Lens Baby and Nick and Smug Mug and Borrow Lenses and Red River Paper and Kubota Image Tools and Skip's Photo Network and ApertureExpert.com and Tamara Lackey and Bourne Media Group and Kelby Training and a whole bunch of people.
You're making me want to win.
Are throwing in more than $10,000 worth of prizes for people to enter the Photofocus Viewbug contest. It's the Photofocus Winner Takes All Photo Contest. Just go onto Google and search Photofocus Viewbug Contest. You'll find the link. And there's no entry fees. We don't steal your copyrights. In fact, we don't even take a license to use your image unless you win. And if you win, we don't take your copyrights. We just get the license to print your image on our page and say you won. That's it. It's the cleanest contest in the world because I wrote the rules to make sure that it was photographer friendly. And there's no game here, no fees to enter. You can enter for free. So if you don't, you're a yahoo.
That sounds like a good deal.
And of course, you can enter through Yahoo on Flickr, but never mind.
Yeah. Now, one other thing that keeps coming up, I was talking with some friends the other day, and they were getting harassed while shooting in the city. And this keeps coming up. I've had problems. You've had problems. I wanted just to talk about a couple of do's and don'ts for urban photography. And I had an idea the other day that, and I don't know if this will fly with folks, but I went out and I experimented, and, we talked about on a past episode shooting with a cell phone. Well, I said, I want a little more control with that. So I went out with a point and shoot that did RAW. And I was just wandering around, and I didn't bring a tripod. I didn't bring a monopod. I didn't get a single piece of harassment. I also, and I tried going back a couple days later to the DSLR, harassed. So I think, I don't know. DSLR is like the instant sign that, I'm here to steal your property, confiscate your private information, and I see through walls. Your corporate secrets are mine. What else would you say? I guess, point and shoots and cell phone cameras have gotten good enough. Sometimes if you just don't feel like being harassed, are we giving in by avoiding confrontation?
Well, here's the thing. It is that way. I mean, I hate to say it. I live in Las Vegas. It's like the tourist capital of the world. And yet there are billboards that say, see something, say something. And what's on the billboard? A photographer, of course, because it was all about photography. That's what caused 9/11. Oh, wait, no, it had nothing to do with it. it's the world has gone insane, Richard. That's the problem. And fortunately, I'm an old man, and I won't live through much of this insanity, in the future. But all I can say is that the only way I know to do this safely, and I hate to capitulate, but you might as well, is who is it that usually hassles you? It's usually private security or cops, right?
Yeah, and
So you know what you do? You hire private security and cops to go with you, and all of a sudden, what was illegal 15 seconds ago is no longer illegal.
Well, that's a good tip for if you are doing a professional shoot, or even a semi-professional shoot. It's not many police departments will make off-duty officers available to be hired reasonably. We were doing a video shoot on the open road in California for a charity bike-a-thon, and we were doing both photo and video, and we just hired 2 off-duty officers, and we were shooting right on the road and being rather inconvenient to everyone else, and they just were directing traffic for us and waved the cops on who showed up to check on what we were doing, and everything was fine. Now, that won't always be an issue for folks. I think the other thing that stands out is, there are ways to be a little less conspicuous. And these include things like don't wear the photo vest. Don't carry 6 lenses with you. Go with like the tourist lens. You have a single lens on the body. Don't have 5 cameras around your neck. Those all go pretty well. The other thing that I found makes a big difference is I've started shooting with a monopod a lot. And, obviously I still need a tripod when I'm doing traditional time-lapse type things or really low-light photography. But I find that the monopod is going a long way, and it's very lightweight. I just got a small carbon fiber one, and weighs like 1.5 pounds with the head on it, and it gives me a stable shot, and it doesn't get me harassed. Here in DC with the monuments, they don't want you blocking traffic, and monopods seem to confuse security officers. They look at it and they don't know what to make out of it.
Yeah, there are a couple other tricks. I've talked about them before. If you're going into a national park or any government land, Bureau of Land Management, government parks, sometimes even state parks, the thing I like to do is I just go right to the ranger station. First thing I do and say, hi, my name is Scott Bourne. I'm a photographer. I'm going to be out photographing for blah, blah, blah. Just wanted to let you know so there's nothing to be concerned about, so you know who I am and what I'm doing. And they really appreciate that. And they'll oftentimes even give you tips and say, oh, wow, we got a moose out in the North Field, so go check that out. And then all of a sudden you're not a terrorist because we know that the terrorist wouldn't check in.
Right. They don't usually offer up their names and check in. Although I think going forward, I'm going to say, hi, I'm Scott Bourne, just in case.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, well, I have used the hi, I'm Richard Harrington several times, but only when I was speeding.
Oh, okay, good.
It basically, I mean, I hate to say it, just bunk. Most of this stuff, nobody really thinks you're a terrorist. They're just they're badge heavy if they're cops or if they're wannabe cops or they're thugs or they're bullies, and this is their power and they're going to use it. So fine. I don't believe they actually think that what you're doing is harming our national security for a minute, nor do they, but it's their chance to exercise their power. Here's how you take their power away. You employ them.
Yeah. Well,
then they become your employee. Then you have the power. And like I say, I cannot tell you how many times I've been told, this is absolutely off limits, $50, come right in.
Yeah, well, money makes the world go round. I will say this much. While I'm very low-key and non-confrontational, when harassed or pushed, I will not hand over my camera or my memory card. You do that, and your images are gone.
You do not have to ever do that unless there's a warrant. You'll probably go to jail. You'll probably get your camera smashed. But, here's the thing. This stuff goes on because people lay down and take it. If enough people were to be like Carlos Miller, who is, my hero, and sue, that's what you got to do. Unless you sue when you're abused, it's just going to keep happening. I mean, I learned this when I was in 6th grade football. Guy came through and hit me in the solar plexus and knocked the wind out of me. It was illegal. My dad was on the sidelines. He was the assistant coach. I said, what should I do? And he said, in the very next play, you grab his face mask and pull him to the ground and let him know that you're not a punk. You got to hit back. And then you know what? He never messed with me for the rest of the year or the next year as we grew up together in football. If you just sit and take it, you're going to continue to have this problem. You have to sue. You have to call the ACLU. You have to call the ASMP. You have to call the PPA. You have to call the WPPI. You have to call everybody and sue if this happens to you. But let me just say, if you are confronted by an actual police officer and he tells you to do something, my advice is just to do it, with the exception of giving up your camera. But do know that you'll probably go to jail. They'll make up some BS charge and they'll take you away, and then you'll get off later. But it's the way it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say, just put your hands at your side or put your hands in your pockets, or behave. But yeah, I get it.
Now, now here's the thing though: if you're on private property and someone asks you to leave, you got to leave. And that's the thing, that you don't have the right to take pictures inside the mall if they say no. Now, what you can do is write the mall management and tell them that you're going to send a letter to every store in there and say you won't shop there anymore. But if they say leave, you got to leave. But if you're standing out on a city sidewalk and you're taking pictures of a private building and out comes Mr. Paul Blart Mall Cop, you can tell him to go whatever he wants, and there's nothing he can do to you. He can't do a thing to you if you're on public property. So I advise people to spend time searching ACLU and the ASMP website. They have a lot of information on photographers' rights. And if you look at some of the stuff Carlos Miller's doing, he's got a lot of information on various decrees that have been issued by certain cities where photographers have been harassed, beaten, or arrested illegally by the police, and then there's been consent decrees from the courts or the police and the victim, and they've had to pay large sums of money, and they've been told they won't do it again, although I've heard that in some of those cases they still do it and they don't care.
Yeah, I was going to say, here in D.C. where I live, there was an issue that came up where they were trying to enforce that people had to have licenses to shoot pictures anywhere near any of the monuments, and then they backpedaled and said, well, this is for street photographers who are selling the images. We don't want them to harass people, so they can't stay longer in any one spot longer than 3 minutes, or something to that effect. And then they backpedaled off of that. And it's always interesting, and I think this ties back to what you were saying, which is that people in power will often try to abuse that power, and for some reason, maybe it's because, I don't know, people are afraid of things being caught on camera that they don't want. And, photography and photojournalism has a long history of exposing wrongs. As soon as you move up to a camera that looks professional, whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, you are going to probably get harassed. And so I think your suggestion of looking at the S&P website, thinking about how you're going to handle this ahead of time, will go a long way. Now, a quick positive spin on some urban photography. Some of the things that I like to recommend is just make sure I have plenty of batteries with me. I find myself that I will frequently run out, and while I'm out on a long day shoot, it's probably because I find myself reviewing my images more. There seems to be more downtime on urban shoots as I'm moving from location to location. Just make sure I travel with plenty of storage, plenty of gear. That monopod goes a long way. I do usually bring a polarizer because of all the glass. I find that that's a big help. Any other gear that you like for shooting in cities other than comfortable shoes?
You pretty much nailed it. I think water is an important thing to do. Stay hydrated. And like I say, hire a cop to come with you.
Yeah, and that's actually not that hard to do. So that makes
and by the way, not that expensive either.
Okay, good. And you just contact the local police department. Say,
contact the local police department, or if you're in a situation where it's private property, contact their local security. Offer to pay. Say these words: I want to hire security for my photo event. As soon as you say those words, they'll like you. No longer will you be the enemy. You will now be their friend because you're going to pay them. And once you pay them, everything is fine. The sacred land that was sacred is no longer sacred. The off-limits sign that was off-limits is no longer off-limits. It's amazing how far that goes. And yeah, I know some people think that's selling out. And I'm sorry, Carlos Miller, if you're listening, I'm going to sell out because I don't have time to do all the things you do. But I'm with you.
Yeah, no, I respect that. And sometimes I choose to avoid confrontation. Sometimes I decide to pre-negotiate it so it's over with before I show up. So not everything has to be a fight.
Well, now, and you live in D.C. where it's really bad. I have to say that, it depends on where you're at. New York City's really bad. D.C.'s really bad. And we're talking to an audience, by the way, Rich, that goes outside the United States. There are certain countries and cities, like in Paris, where you do need a license, where there are laws that regulate this stuff much more closely, and you have far fewer rights. So keep in mind, we're talking about this as U.S. residents with a U.S. residency bias. If there are certain countries you're going to where, people carry AK-47s, you have no right to do anything other than die. So forget everything we said and just lay down.
Now, to that end, is there a global website or the State Department website? I know that the State Department website has a great overview per country of things you should know that are illegal when you go to this country and some do's and don'ts.
I don't think there's I'm not aware of it. If our listeners know of anything, they can sure tell us, and we'll tweet about it on our Photofocus Twitter page. By the way, that's twitter.com/photofocus, or we'll put it up on the website at some point in time.
Or we just have to get Trey Radcliffe to document everything, because hasn't he gone to every country by this point?
I think he's been to every geolocation on the planet already, hasn't he? And shot an HDR of it.
It sure seems like it. All right. So last topic for today, and that is some resources for Lightroom. We're both getting into Adobe Lightroom. We're starting to explore it a bit more. You've been, I'm putting some training to bed, and I'm switching. I'm literally going to be digging in more and more. It's my big project for the coming weeks. How about you? What are some of your favorite resources that you've come across that's making the switch to Lightroom easier?
Well, I'll just start with the Adobe page. They've got a boatload of information. As an Aperture user switching to Lightroom, I'm mostly trying to deal with two big issues. Number one, if you're an Aperture user, you have a managed library, or if you're an iPhoto user, you have a managed library. And if you go to Lightroom, you will no longer have a managed library. That's the big problem. That's the issue that most of us that have used these programs in the past are going to have to face right away. Like, oh my God, you mean I'm going to be responsible for knowing where my photos are? Don't they know how stupid I am?
Well, and to that end, I think a lot of people, not every Aperture user uses the managed library.
That's true.
It is
used the reference library. They'll have no problem.
Yeah, but I think what that points to, and this has always been Adobe's approach, because it's the same thing with all of their tools. They take the idea of, well, it's your stuff. Don't you know where you put it? And so if you are expecting the software to organize your hard drive for you, you might want to look at a few things. Now, there are, the importer can target specific folders. You've got things like the camera importer with Adobe Bridge that can rename things and target a location. There are third-party utilities. At this point, are you relying upon Lightroom to copy, or are you deciding, I'm going to manually copy and make a disk image or a verified copy to my drive first, and then the Lightroom process starts?
So it's a two-part question and answer for me, Rich. Let's take my existing library, and I'll answer the question from that perspective. I am moving files out of Aperture to a location on a drive, and then importing from that location to Lightroom. So the images are going to where I want them to stay out of Aperture, and then they're going to be imported from that location.
And you're exporting the original out of Aperture, so is it keeping its original shoot date, or is it giving it a new date?
Okay, so that's a more complicated question. I'm writing a post for Photofocus, and I don't know whether it will have been up by the time this show airs. It may or may not have been up, but there is a way to save the metadata when you export. You can export the original with the metadata, and everything will be like when you shot it. But that, unfortunately, is the only thing you can export from Aperture. You can't export any of the changes that you made. It'll all be destructive. So what I'm doing is, for my 5-star images, I'm exporting the master file and a TIFF high-res 16-bit image.
16-bit is key. That is a preference you need to turn on. It doesn't automatically do
Correct.
The 16-bit TIFF.
And that will be the corrected file. That image will be, it's no longer non-destructive, but that was the way I wanted the image to look when it was in Aperture. I will move the master file along with it. If I ever need to go back and retool that image, I can import that master into Lightroom and try to match what I did in Aperture, or I can simply take the cataloged TIFF and export it back out to whoever needs it. So that's the way I'm doing my existing library. My new stuff, I'm I had the option of importing from the card, like we've always done in Aperture or iPhoto, if you're an Aperture or iPhoto user. Many of you who use Lightroom also import from the card, but I'm still using the preferred method for me of taking them off the card onto the location where I know I want them to be. It's just easier for me to keep track, and it's just a drive I've named the drive Photos. So even in my senile years, I can't screw this one up.
Where are my pictures? They're on my Photos drive. Yes.
Yes. And then I took a labeler, a dyno labeler, and I made a label that said Photos and stuck it on that drive. And so both the software label and the hardware label say Photos. So that's where all my pictures are. So if anything goes wrong, there you go. I've got them all there. So I'm importing both ways to a specific location. There's no right or wrong way to do this. I'm not suggesting anybody follow my advice on how I'm doing it. I'm just saying this is what I'm doing because it helps me to know where I should put things. And then when they're imported into Lightroom, as long as they stay in the place where they originally were and Lightroom found them as you manage the folder stuff, that it'll all be on the same drive.
Now, to that end, one of the things that I've been toying with a lot, and I'm finding this especially as I'm moving large libraries, is through the years, as I upgrade camera bodies or switch, I'm finding that my file names aren't as unique as they could be. In other words, like, oh, wow, there sure is a whole lot of those MVI 001 images on my drive. And, obviously camera counters can be reset, or you change bodies from the same manufacturer. You can start having overlapping numbers. I'm really becoming a fan of, after I transfer my images, using Adobe Bridge and batch renaming the files so they have a unique name on the drive. And so I'm doing a batch rename with Bridge, and I'm renaming basically with a descriptive name for the shoot and then a date and timestamp that's unique. And that date and timestamp is actually the date shot plus a hours, minutes, seconds, and unique number after that. But actually the hours, minutes, seconds is usually enough. But if you are shooting in burst mode, it could be an issue if you've got those really fast. But it'll give them all a unique name. And because that name is based on alphanumeric for client plus the date created, it's giving me a better sense of security that my images, if I ever do have to reconnect or start searching for things, I won't start having the same problems as camera number names. And I think that this is worth doing. It's always bothered me. Most of the tapeless cameras that video cameras use have been doing this for years, where every single file generated by that video camera has a unique number from any other file in the universe because it does it based on date, time, and camera serial number. And for some reason, DSLR and photo manufacturers treat us like we're idiots, and they just, they'll feel much better if it's a really easy understanding name like, DSC _ 0001.
But you can also do that on Lightroom imports. You can set up a preset that does all that batch renaming as well. You don't have to do the bridge step.
True. But the point being is maybe take that step to give your files a unique name. And Lightroom will do it at the desktop level, at the Finder level, to the original file, or just what it's importing.
As you're you can always do it, but as you're importing, you can make the cool thing about Lightroom that I really like the import preset capabilities because it's very powerful. You can set up a preset to do just about anything you want it to do. It's a little more powerful than Aperture's import presets, although Aperture does have import presets as well. The one in Lightroom is a little more powerful and it's a little more flexible. So you can batch rename and set up all these various things that you just described, Rich, real easily on import.
Good, and I would recommend people actually take the time to do that. Scott, anything else you want to add about as you're moving into Lightroom that's standing out for you, or some gotchas that you want to make sure people think about?
Well, just like I say, be real careful about knowing where your images are and make sure they're backed up. You can set Lightroom to back up the catalog on exit, which it does automatically. But remember, that's not backing up your images. That's backing up your catalog, which is a very different experience for those of us coming from Aperture.
Yes.
Because in Aperture, if you use the Vault, you're backing up your images and the changes. But in Lightroom, no, sir, you are just backing up the Lightroom catalog. And if you lose those images, you'll have all those wonderful changes to blank stuff.
Yeah, and that points to the fact that you need to be backing up to multiple drives and hopefully multiple locations, which is a topic we could dig into on a future show. We've got a couple of digital asset management friends in our space, and we'll invite them on and we'll dig a little bit deeper on some best practices for those things. Scott, anything else? Any other sponsors to mention today?
Well, just want to mention that we do have an Amazon link there on the homepage at photofocus.com for you. Also, follow Photofocus on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter, Scott Bourne. And if you do, you're often eligible for various contests and such that you'll hear about on the Twitter. Remember that both Rich and I write for the Photofocus website, which is at photofocus.com. It's updated 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and has been since November 2nd, 1998.
Yep.
It's all right there.
And we got a bunch of new tutorials for Adobe software that have been popping up, so be sure to check that out. You can follow me on social media, usually under Red Pixel. That's RHEDPIXEL. And both of us are on Google+. I'm trying to get a little more involved on the Google+ side, so feel free to look over there. But we're both very active on Twitter, and just look us up. If we find a good resource, we share it, and tons of great stuff over at the Photofocus website. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in and joining us this week. We had a lot of good things to talk about. Scott, thanks again.
Thanks for having me on the show, Rich.
Great. And we'll be back again in another 10 days with a new episode.